Good morning, everyone. Council is convened for a couple of work sessions this morning, July 30th, 2025. We'll start out with the Housing Option Study and Action Plan implementation. So Oliver and Jose, I think that's you. So welcome, good to see you.
Yes, good morning, councillors. For the record, Oliver Ojaka, Community Planning Director, and this work session is going to focus on the housing option study and action plan implementation. Chair, as you indicated, we are going to be continuing focusing on residential code update. Today with a focus on multifamily. For Councillor Little, and I don't know if Councillor Fuentes is online, but after the adoption of the study in 2022, Council directed staff to begin implementation of short-term code-based strategies. If you recall, we started with phase 1, focusing on middle housing and single-family code work. That was adopted after a long hearing. The council adopted that in March of 2024. I must say that that work was what led the county to receive a SMART award or planning award from the governor, among other studies that we've worked on. And I commend our consultant and staff for working on that. Since then, we have focused on phase 2, multifamily and affordable housing code update. Of course, we are going to be continuing that implementation work, focusing on phase 3. But I would like to introduce our consultant, Steve Force. I'm not sure if Steve is online, but Elizabeth Decker is here of 3J Consulting. They have been with us since the beginning of this work, and then following the helping us to go through the implementation at the direction of council. Part of this work is also going to be folded in with all the changes that the council will approve, and then the changes we will be making to update our housing element as part of the comp plan update. So all this is interrelated. So with that, let me turn it over to our consultant, Elizabeth Decker. I will also say that the project managers, Susan Ellinger and Amy Wooten, are also in the audience. And of course, Jose Alvarez, program manager in our land use department. So with that, Elizabeth, I'll turn it over to you. And we are here to answer questions that council may have.
Yes, thank you, Oliver, and good morning, councilors and council chair. For the record, Elizabeth Decker with Jet Planning, working on that team with 3J Consulting. We've been lucky to work with you for the last 3 years now on the Housing Option Study and Action Plan and the code implementation piece. So today we want to talk more about the multifamily implementation for the residential zones for Clark County. Next, if you would, please. So we wanted to talk you through some of the evolving policy context, which has changed since the Housing Option Study and Action Plan was first adopted in 2022, and talk about how that's informing the proposed direction for the multifamily code updates, and then leave time for your questions and discussion so that we can hear what's on your minds. Next, please. So policy, just to give you a sense of the context that we're planning in, right? So the county has been planning for housing for decades, and through successive comprehensive plans has been working to plan to meet housing needs for households of all income levels, really a range of different housing options. And two of the key efforts that inform that work is the Housing Option Study and Action Plan and the most recent, the pending 2025 comprehensive plan update that you've been hearing so much about. Next. So when we, flash back to the HOSAP that was adopted in 2022, that was really focused on understanding the local housing challenges specific to the unincorporated Vancouver UGA. So because that's an urban area within the city's or within the county's urban growth area, it was appropriate for urban level residential types. And so that's where the county focused to look at opportunities to encourage creation of housing that's more affordable to particularly low and moderate incomes that we're seeing some gaps in housing availability. So we looked at strategies to remove regulatory barriers and other tools that would help provide access for affordable, quality, and flexible housing across future generations. Next, please. And what came out of that HOSAP, in addition to an understanding of the housing landscape, was really a series of implementation strategies that we looked at 4 different topic areas across 3 different timeframes. And so we've really focused on the code piece for implementation because that's most directly in the council's control. The county is able to implement that on a shorter time frame by going through these code development and update opportunities. But just to keep in the back of your mind that there are other strategies in the plan that the county is continuing to pursue around things like financial incentives, working on programs and partnerships. So there are other pieces that also help support housing. It's not just code, but code, you bring me in when you want to talk about code. So that's what I'm here to talk to you about. And we are on phase 2 of 3 phases currently planned of code-based strategies. So the county was very successful in developing and adopting the middle housing and smaller single-family code updates. Last year, we're now focusing on the multifamily and affordable code updates, and we're already looking ahead to a phase 3 of code updates. We heard that the county wanted to accelerate some of those strategies and move forward to work on manufactured home parks and some other development review and affordable housing supportive strategies. So just a preview of coming attractions. Just to remind you, the great work the county has already done on the middle housing code updates, significantly expanded opportunities. We were looking with that package really specifically at the low density zones. What are the R1 zones across the county? There's 5 of them. And that work focused on expanding a variety of housing types in all 5 of those zones and addressing the scale of development so that there are more options for smaller lot, single family detached, upgrade accessory dwelling units, duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes, townhouses, cottage clusters, and a new type of development that we termed compact lots, which was an opportunity for cottage scale development and a different spatial orientation. So the county, even though that was adopted just a little more than a year ago, the county has already seen really strong initial interest in applying these code updates. So 2/3 of new subdivisions that the county has received for permitting since then, that total over 400 lots, have used different provisions of this new code. So primarily the compact lot or other lot size reductions for opportunities to make smaller lots, slightly more dense housing, and provide more housing opportunities for county residents. We haven't yet seen a lot of interest in some of the duplex, triplex, other attached styles, but certainly these provisions are being used already, and it will be interesting to see how that continues to unfold. Building on that success, next slide, please. We moved into the multifamily code updates about right on the heels of adopting those middle housing code updates. And we started off looking at the strategies that were adopted in the HOSAP, but also with growing awareness of the direction we got for that the county's been developing in the 2025 comp plan. There's additional, you've had multiple work sessions and hearings about the housing element and the direction needed, the housing needs that the county is trying to achieve. And so the goal with the multifamily code updates was to be fully in line with that. We've also had additional legislation come out of Olympia that's fine-tuned some of the zoning parameters and requirements for cities and counties. So in order to be fully reflective of today's policy landscape, it's amazing how quickly it changes even from 2022 when it was adopted with the HOSAP. We have worked to refine the direction for phase 2 of these HOSAP code updates to make sure that we're keeping pace. And so what that really all adds up to is a more streamlined focus on multifamily opportunities for this phase 2. When we're looking at what are termed the residential zones, the medium and higher density, the R zones, just a real straightforward focus on multifamily by focusing those allowed uses in those zones, supporting that helps support more efficient use of the very limited medium and high density sites existing in the county, and then enhancing feasibility of that multifamily development if that's what's being promoted, that there are more opportunities to do that well by adjusting some of the site development requirements, and then also looking at the mixed use zones to see if there's additional capacity and opportunities there. So broad picture, we'll talk more about some of the code details, but that's the direction that we're headed, and I can tell you a little bit more next. Again, the 2025 comp plan update is really driving a lot of these changes, and we want to make sure that all the code updates are fully in line with the direction for the comp plan update, so that you're in compliance with both the planning and the zoning elements by the end of this year. So significant focus with this update on updating the housing element. As you know, you probably are tired of listening to Jose talk about it by this point, but he's been doing great work, and you all have had really great conversations so far to plan for housing capacity for all housing income levels by income band is the way that the state is talking about this. And that's a lot more specific than how counties and cities have been planning for overall housing capacity for the previous 40 years of GMA planning. And so part of that work, part of that direction is about matching specific housing types to different income levels. I think we all recognize that's a bit of an inexact science, right? That planning and zoning does not directly dictate the price of housing. And so it's more about associations that certain types of housing are generally, come in at different price levels than others. So just to say, we recognize this isn't perfect science, but it is about providing a greater range of housing types in the hopes that those are a little more targeted towards the various income levels. And that helps implement some of the legislation from Olympia, HB 1220 that came out in 2021, and the Housing for All planning tool. Next. So what that means for Clark County, the numbers that you're working with, you've probably seen these and some different tables in different formats and different work sessions, but really looking at providing opportunities for apartments. Multiplexes is the term that really is inclusive of a lot of middle housing types, and single family. And the state has, identified how those correlate to different income bands. And the biggest need that's emerged in Clark County in terms of planning capacity is for apartments that are available to households earning 80% or less of the area media income. And there's a need for capacity for about 26,000 homes. And there's a lot of additional capacity needed. That what some of the initial analysis showed is that from the VBLM is that there's only existing capacity to meet about 1/3 of that need. And so the county's looking for a range of strategies that can help meet that additional 2/3. On the multiplex and the single family, the middle housing code updates and the existing low density zones do a pretty good job of already meeting that capacity. So we're really focused with these phase 2 code updates on how can we help meet that additional apartment need. Next. And when we're talking about multifamily, I think, apartment really conveys a wide range of potential development types. So we did want to take a moment and give you a bit of a visual flavor of some of the multifamily development that the county has seen recently, so that it's a little bit more clear as we're working through these code updates and you're hearing me say multifamily apartments, like what we're actually talking about. And so we're not talking about, towers in a park. We're not talking about super dense downtown development. The predominant development type in Clark County context has been more of, this garden apartment style where there's a lot of open space throughout the development. It's 2 to 3 stories, mostly walk up, with a variety of things like landscaping, common spaces, possibly a pool. I'm surprised how many of these projects have pools because I don't think of that as really our climate, but what a feature. And so these are the predominant types, and those are generally coming in at this like 20 to 30 unit per acre overall site density, which is going to be important when we start talking about what we're planning for Next slide. And then the other sort of, general type of multifamily that we're looking at is, for lack of a better term, I came up with calling these a low-rise apartment type. And that's a slight step up in density from those garden apartments. So we're looking for more of a 40 to 50 units per acre density there. The one on the right is a project called 134th Street Lofts. That's both apartments and some extended stay lodging. So you can see it's a couple additional stories that's permitted under the height limit, and it still has some site amenities. And then the other notable feature is that it's got tuck under parking rather than all surface parking. That helps get to a slightly higher density on that site. But again, we're still not looking at 10-story towers or anything. Still relatively compact scale. So next, if you would. So with those housing types in mind, some recent projects, we come back to this multifamily capacity that the county needs. And so the housing projections show that the county needs to triple the current capacity for multifamily. And that's going to take a range of strategies, including map-based as well as code-based strategies to get the county to that, 26,000 odd figure in terms of capacity. And again, I'm sure you've heard this before. It's about capacity. It's not about, you're not being measured on did the county approve X number of permits, but making sure that capacity is there and that it's reserved for the 20-year cycle coming up. Next. So part of the reason why the county is looking for additional capacity is that the existing buildable land distribution really only includes a small percentage of buildable land for that medium and high density residential development. So only about 13% of the Vancouver UGA is reserved for those higher density types, and the remainder is urban low. So that's why looking at that land base to meet those needs. And then next. And then even within those areas, a notable thing that we identified in the HOSAP was that the recent development patterns, so this is 2015 to 2022, only about half of the units that were permitted in that limited slice of urban medium and urban high were developed as multifamily units, and the other half were developed as platted residential. So that's mostly townhouses in these zones, could be some small lot, single family detached. Those are definitely products that are in demand. But when we're trying to use when the county is looking to how they can meet this multifamily capacity for the 2025 comp plan, this tells us that there's a lot of room to go in terms of getting more multifamily capacity. So next. So in order to triple that multifamily housing capacity, the 2025 comp plan has really identified two main directions, some map amendments that are going to double where there's additional primarily urban medium designations. So adding more land on the map is going to be key to increasing capacity, but also text amendments to the zoning code integrated into this phase 2 that prioritize the multifamily housing types for those zones and then increase both the minimum and maximum densities so that those create greater efficiencies in terms of how much housing can be produced on those sites. And then the final piece, if you would please, that's helped inform the scope of the phase 2 updates is the evolving legislative direction. So, in addition to this housing for all work that's driven some of the specifics in the housing element, the HB 1220 that I mentioned, there's been really a broad range of legislation, a lot of specifics, a lot of focus. The state's really working hard to see how to meet the statewide housing needs. But one other bill that I'd particularly point to is SB 5184 that introduces some new caps on parking minimums that cities and counties can apply in their jurisdictions. And so the HOSAP did have some strategies around adjusting parking minimums for multifamily and other housing types. But we've refined the focus distinctly to meet this new Senate bill. So that sort of superseded some of the specifics of the HOSAP. So we put that all together, and then we have the proposed code updates. But I'll just pause there for a sec if there's any questions, clarifying questions, or that I can help answer before we talk about what that means in code.
Thank you. Are there any questions from counselors? Please go ahead.
I have a few, but I would prefer to just
Okay,
finish.
I just wanted to
Moving on.
pause if there was, a quick clarifying question
Yeah.
that, yeah.
Anyone online? Nope. Okay.
All right. Thank you, Chair. Great. Well, let's dive into the code approach. So when we talk about adding up all those pieces and the package of code that we've worked on phase 2 to help address all those needs, we've really sort of summarized it in 6 primary concepts here. So we'll talk through each of these, but again, the biggest one is focusing those permitted uses in those medium and high density zones on multifamily housing types. That helps use the land more efficiently, simplifying some dimensional standards to make it easier to build on those sites. Also enhancing the usability of landscaping and open spaces. So if there are, to use those requirements to set aside some open spaces in ways that best benefit the quality of life for the folks living there. Adjusting some off-street parking requirements, both in response to county identified issues as well as this new state legislation, and then looking to the mixed use zones and adjusting some of the housing options there to also help reinforce the capacity in the multifamily zones and opportunities. And we also, sort of a reflective and iterative planning process, are using this as an opportunity to refine some of the middle housing and low density zone standards that were adopted in phase 1. In the first year or so of implementation, there have been a few small pieces that have come up as needing some clarification, interpretation. And so wanting to be responsive to that and see this as the opportunity to address some of that. So next slide, if you would. Oh, you're already at, thank you. So to set the stage, when we start talking about some of these zoning updates, always trying not to be too jargony. But the first piece to sort of understand what we're talking about is how we're simplifying the zoning framework to set us up for some of these strategies. So from the comp plan, we're getting 2 land use designations, the urban high and the urban medium. That's currently implemented by 5 different residential or R zones, and each residential zone has a companion office residential zone that permits some additional office and non-residential uses in a mix. So currently there's 5 of those. All the numbers after them refer to the current maximum densities. I won't rattle them all off. But based on the increased focus on multifamily housing types and refining the density ranges, the first piece to set up all these code updates is that we saw the opportunity to consolidate these zones to simplify them into 3 proposed zones. So I'll generally just talk about the R zones and just know there's a silent OR office residential zone that goes along with it as well. But in each of these, the primary designations are the residential zones. The OR is pretty limited, but all the updates will update both pairs. So we're down to 3 zones to consolidate them to implement what we're talking, the strategies we're talking about. So just in the back of your mind, keep these 3 zones in mind. So next, if you would. So off the bat, the single most significant change with these code updates and the driving rationale is to focus the permitted uses on multifamily uses. So for the 3 zones in the R24 zone, we did see some opportunity for a mix of uses, some smaller scale like triplex and quadplexes uses there, as well as multifamily. But then the R36 and the R50, looking at more streamlined focus on solely multifamily uses. Again, if you remember the development patterns that the county's been seeing, only half multifamily, half platted residential. And given the capacity the county needs in order to demonstrate that they're meeting the 2025 comp plan direction, this was the most significant code change to focus on those multifamily uses rather than allowing those other uses at this time, to make sure that the limited capacity in these zones is reserved for the multifamily development anywhere in that 20-year timeframe. All right, next. Oh, and just one other thing that I wanted to say, when we talk about multifamily, it doesn't all have to be apartments. It could also be things that might to the eye look like a townhouse, but is on a single site and is rented individually. So this isn't so much about the form of it. It is about, what it looks like, but it is about making sure that it is a multifamily housing type that is available. So thanks. Back to code concept 2 is we're talking about using the land more efficiently And what we mean by that is setting minimum and maximum densities for each of these zones that better targets a range of development that feeds into the VBLM and creates that capacity, or the vacant buildable lands model. Sorry for the acronyms. And creates that capacity that we're looking for. So really introducing these minimum densities and bringing them closer to the maximums. So the minimums are set at, somewhere between 70 and 80% of the maximum that's permitted. If you remember some of those density ranges we were talking about with the garden apartments and the low-rise apartments, the R24 and the R36 are going to have capacity for really any of those garden apartments or other types of, arrangements of multifamily at that sort of slightly lower scale. And then the R50 in particular, you can see an increased focus at the 40 to 50 units per acre range, which would be solidly into that low-rise apartment category. The county has not seen a lot of development at those densities, but that's really an opportunity that the county is looking to create in order to meet that capacity and meet their housing for all planning goals. So that's what the R50 zone is intended to accomplish. And, again, knowing that that might not happen overnight, but that there's that capacity created for the 20-year planning horizon. So next piece, please. Next piece is in those zones, looking to simplify some of the dimensional standards. For the most part, the existing 50-foot height limit and the setbacks, seemed conducive and in alignment with the housing types that we're looking at, the low-rise apartments as well as the garden apartments. And so no changes proposed. We didn't think that the 50-foot height limit, needed to be increased to create the capacity we're talking about, that was adequate to meet the housing types and create the capacity needed. Most of the setbacks were fine, but there is one existing standard. The setbacks are sort of scaled for taller buildings. And we thought that there could be some opportunities if someone is building a less tall building under a 35-foot height limit, that there could be a decreased setback so that if the building is shorter, it could be a little bit closer to the property line, a little bit more flexibility. And that's in line with some of the other standards for comparable zones, so that it's for parity there, that the rear setbacks are similar for those shorter buildings. And then there's also the opportunity by focusing on multifamily uses. Right now, the code has a variety of minimum lot sizes for if it's a duplex, if it's a townhouse, if it's a quadplex. And with the focus on multifamily, there's really an opportunity to simplify the minimum lot sizes. From a code perspective, I'm like, there's all these tables and we can consolidate them into one. So hopefully that improves the code user's experience and is simpler to administer. Next piece, on these sites, really looking to improve quality of life and enhance that as much as we can through code standards by enhancing the usability of landscaping and open spaces. There are a variety of requirements right now in the code for both landscaping and setbacks and open spaces. There's some overlap between them that isn't entirely clear. So clarifying those and making it, helping each space be used to its maximum potential rather than just saying, oh yeah, you got to set aside 10 feet for a random arborvitae hedge over there. That's not helping improve quality of life necessarily. So the idea is to really focus on what can contribute to a well-designed site and making it clear how those standards apply. Within the open space in particular, there's been a lot of different interpretations of what that means. And, is it just sort of a big area with wood chips that's a dog run? Or, is it a play area? Is it a community garden? Is it, a landscaped garden space that folks can come and picnic or just stroll through? So the code standards the proposed code does focus on higher quality spaces and has more direction on what kinds of amenities could improve that area. So focusing on the quality rather than increasing quantity. So there's no increases proposed to the total amount of open space required. In fact, sort of the net of landscaping and open space will be a bit consolidated through some of these clarifications of how they overlap. All right, so next piece is looking at off-street parking. And this comes about, one, because we got really clear direction from the legislature as we were working on this project. And the reason the legislature, the reason planners, I don't know if this is in your newsfeed, but certainly there's a lot of talk about adjusting off-street parking because it's one of the biggest drivers of site area, right? It takes up significant amount of the site to provide for parking, particularly surface parking. That's the most economical. And it can create these trade-offs between, well, I need enough space on the lot to have parking, and so I can't add any more units because then the parking would, you get into these situations where the parking is competing with the housing. And when we're looking at adding housing capacity, right, the goal is to increase the housing capacity and adjust the parking to match. So with the statewide parking reforms, we have very clear direction that the parking minimums need to be reduced. So looking at changing the standards to 1 space per unit for single family homes, half a space per unit for multifamily, which is significantly less than the 1.5 space currently in the code. And then the kicker, really, in my opinion, is that there's no minimums for units under 1,200 square feet. So that's actually going to be most multifamily, for affordable housing, and for senior housing. And so, I think what's important to take out of this is, one, this is what we need to do to be in compliance with state regulations. But two, this is about changing what the jurisdictional minimums are. It is not about changing what developers may choose to provide. This is not about increasing parking maximums that would cap the amount of parking. And it's not about saying the county thinks the right number of parking is 0 or 0.5 spaces per unit. It's about getting the county out of that equation so that it is more the developer thinking, all right, I have this much site area, I have this many units that I'm trying to build. I am looking at this type of tenant. I'm anticipating that they have this many cars. I know I'm, based on previous projects or my lending requirements, this is how much parking I'm going to need in order to lease this successfully and have a financially successful project. So it's not saying, to be really clear, it's not saying the county is prioritizing projects with no parking. It's saying the county is getting out of the business of regulating parking and leaving that to individual developers. All right, and then the last concept is looking at our mixed use zones as an opportunity to further expand housing. So right here, right now, part of the work there is on focusing some of the allowed uses, again, centering multifamily, but also a little bit more variety with some duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes, as well as cottage housing that's been permitted there. But removing some of these platted projects like single family detached and townhouse uses that typically are associated with the higher income bands, households that are earning more money, as we're focusing on creating that capacity for 80% or less. The standards right now, it's a mixed use zone. So the idea is that there's both residential and non-residential, but there is a significant residential component permitted. Right now it's 80% of the site. And the proposal is to increase that even further to 90% of the site so that there's more room for housing. And then to adjust the density range, that'll be some slight increases there so that it's consistent with the ranges we're looking at in the R zones. Next, please. And then just to wrap, to round out the package, as mentioned, we're reflective practitioners. We want to go back and make our earlier work even better based on some early implementations. So some middle housing code refinements, fairly small tweaks, but things that have come up that folks have pointed to as being needed. First piece is that the county-wide middle housing standards adopted for the R1 zones, we are looking at how to apply those directly within the Highway 99 sub area in lieu of some of the sub area specific design standards that, were adopted a couple decades ago. And so just there's some evolution there. So as well as some consistency that we can provide. Also seeing the opportunity to, again, support housing capacity with more efficient development patterns by increasing the minimum density in low density zones. The original work really focused on creating more smaller lot sizes that increases the allowed maximum densities. And we just didn't have a lot of conversation about minimum densities at that time, but are now seeing the opportunity to add that in. Also, there's some clarifications about how these compact lot and narrow lot development standards apply and how they overlap, particularly as we've seen the compact lots be one of the most popular types of the middle housing code updates being used. So we want to make sure that those are as clear and easy to use as possible. And then there's a small clarification about townhouses, really a wording error on my part. So just clarifying that it's 4 per structure, not 4 per project total that can be permitted. And so that code update was already fast tracked and has already been approved. So with that, I'll turn it over to discussion, your questions, and then we have some next steps in terms of refining the code language, and your feedback will be really important for that as we move into code writing.
There's a lot to digest here. Thanks very much. So Councillor Belcott, I see your hand up.
Thanks, Chair. I have a question related to the apartments. You said that the need for apartments is pretty great in Clark County. Have you identified particular areas in Clark County where apartments are needed? And if so, have you had some of those discussions with the builders?
Do you want to talk about this, Jose?
Good morning, Councilor. Jose Alvarez with Community Planning. We have looked at certain areas within our existing multifamily zones to make those changes. There's some increases to areas abutting or adjoining those existing multifamily zones. And I think the biggest change is in that 179th Street area south of 179th, where we're looking at adding more R24, where there was R12 or R16 zone properties. So those were the biggest changes were being proposed. The developers have been part of our code advisory group. So we've had those conversations with some of those folks.
Thank you, Jose. I was just like wondering where geographically, and so you answered that. Thanks so much.
Sure.
Okay, other questions? I look to you, Councillor Young.
Yes, I have quite a few actually. Thank you for coming. It's good to see you again.
Likewise.
A few things. Number one is it's encouraging to see that one of the first slides, 2/3 of the new development is starting to use some of the new code that we implemented during phase 1. What I am interested in is if we have been following the results of that. So, how, compared to what it was before, what are we getting? What is the affordability level of that stock that's being produced? How does it compare? Is it bringing us towards our goals overall? Yes, just kind of a general thing, and comparing it to like the inputs that the whatever you want to call it on the VBLM, or is that what we're seeing coming out of this? And I know that we're at the very beginning, so there's probably some lag time, and it will probably actually increase further than 2/3 at some point. I know you don't have that information right now, but I would be interested in seeing that. And one thing that I was thinking when we were discussing this is I don't know if we ever, where we're upzoning, especially some of the lower density zones, are we tracking, are we kind of planning for some of this infill that we're going to get? We're going to see demolition take place, and is that eroding our affordable housing stock? Are changes with very good intentions having some unintended consequences on that? One of the things that I also interested in getting some data on, and the new production that's coming, especially with single family housing, I would like to know what we're seeing in terms of ADUs. Are we seeing 1 ADU? Are we seeing 2 ADUs? On average, is there particular areas where we're seeing 2 ADUs and particular areas where we're seeing no ADUs, to kind of understand what we're seeing come from that. And the reason that I mention that is because I'm thinking about the one slide that was talking, I think, about our 18 to 24 units per acre. My house is a 5,000 square foot lot, which is 9 units per acre, but I I have one ADU right now, and I could convert my basement to another. So at R9 with 2 ADUs, you're essentially meeting the same density as that. And so I was curious, it looked to me like in the R24, single family housing was not allowed. I'm wondering if we ought to think about allowing it with the requirement that it meet that density level with ADUs, or however that works. Because ultimately, I think the ability to have whatever the market brings, I think is important. And then if we're meeting our density targets, I think that's the ultimate goal. And I was curious, this is something that I've always kind of thought about, and I don't know if it's the economics driving that or if it's the code, but I always wondered why in the heck, when you're driving up Highway 99 and you see a Walmart, you see a Winco, why don't they put housing on top of those buildings? I mean, is it economically not feasible, or is it just because code doesn't currently allow that?
I think it's a complex question. I think it's mostly as I understand, and it's not my specialty, but in the Highway 99 area, for example, I believe that they could do it, but it has to do with the feasibility, it has to do with the demand, and it has to do with sort of what those developers specialize in. If you're looking to do a Walmart, you're not necessarily thinking,
Right.
I do Walmart and housing. So
Yeah, I just always wondered that, because when I lived in Germany, I actually at one point did live above a grocery store, and it was awesome. You know, we just went down and did our grocery shopping and went right back upstairs. Didn't ever leave the building. So that was, I mean, we're probably
dream.
too far in this process to look at that, but I just thought it was an interesting thing. And then about some of the height requirements, I'm sure that you guys have reviewed this, but if I'm just curious if it was thought about. So, for example, 50-foot height limit, and we talked about the setback requirement, and I absolutely agree that with a lower height, you can reduce the setback. I think that's excellent. I'm wondering also, though, if there is provision for if somebody wants to build higher in a center and maybe have a bigger parking lot, that we actually allow them to build higher with a bigger setback. Has that been considered?
Right. So you mean going over 50 feet?
Well, no, I'm talking more like the R24, R30, that type. We usually get three floors or something. And I don't know, do we have the maximum of 50 feet there, or is it lower?
Oh gosh, pop quiz.
Yeah. Just my thought process behind it is, I think the biggest thing is, that visual, right? The angle of the top of the building to the property line. And, if somebody wants to build something that's 5 stories and hit R30 or whatnot and have a big park or something, big green space or additional parking for the residents or something, I think that would be, maybe it would never get built. I don't know. But the thing is if we don't allow things, it won't ever happen for sure. Just a thought on that. And then, yes, so I also wanted to know specifically with the open space requirements, did
Mhm.
we, I mean, I think ultimately fundamentally we need to think about what our goal is. And that is we're building with higher density. I think access to nature and green space is an important component of our mental health. What I'm wondering is if a property is close or adjacent to or very nearby, there's a public park or an open space that's going to be conserved as an open space in perpetuity,
Mhm.
just given that it's there's certain areas that we know are never going to develop. The county owns them, the state owns them, whatever it may be. Do we give any consideration to that, or are they still required to have so much green space or open space?
We've had some conversations about that. I don't think that we have a final code proposal because exactly those are important considerations, and we've talked about some different code models where if you're within a quarter mile, a half mile of an open space or a park, that there's some kind of reduction in the on-site open space that's required. So that's part of the whole conversation
Okay.
at this point.
And I definitely appreciate the focus when we're talking about open space on what is it that we're actually accomplishing. Because I remember when we first had this discussion, I think it was well over 2 years ago, I drove around and looked at some of the buildings that were being built with that requirement for open space and rec space, and some of it just like, 3 dog parks in the same place, and you're like, yeah, we're not really doing anything here by doing that. So I appreciate that effort to keep that focused on accomplishing our goals. Highway 99. I've actually consistently heard that Highway 99, that the overlay is very overly restrictive and is really reducing the ability of the area to develop out. I appreciate that we're looking at maybe overriding that, but long term, I'd like to look to see if we want to completely redo that or just remove the overlay and just go with general code as it is. And then the last thing that I was hoping that staff could provide us with so we can get a better feel and understanding of the changes that we're implementing is if we could get what I would call like a heat map of density increase and zone changes that we're making. So for example, just a map that is shaded showing us various areas and whether, they're increasing by 30%, 20%, 10%, if they're staying the same, just so that we can kind of get a feel throughout the area of, the effect and how we're changing things. That's kind of a big ask, but I think it would be very helpful for us to fundamentally understand the changes that we're looking at making. So otherwise, continued great work. I appreciate it. I think we're really making some headway and making things more buildable and hopefully start closing that gap on the shortage we have.
Thank you. Is Councilor Little on? Councilor Little?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. I just have one question about slide 10. I want to see if I understand the big picture here. Before I ask about you circled there about apartments, under single family, it says that we need about 10,000 homes. And then it says the capacity is met in existing low density zones. And then in multiplex, about 7,000 homes are needed. And the capacity is created through middle housing code updates. Can you explain what that means as the capacity is met or capacity is created? And does that mean we've already done what we need to do to achieve that? And when would it be achieved, or is it already achieved?
Yes, thanks for the question. Those are both met. I'll let Jose provide some more detail, but when I said that it's created through the middle housing code updates, that's work that has been done. And together, both the middle housing and the single family can be accommodated within the existing low density zones. Those code updates allow that opportunity for both housing types.
Yeah, Council, this is Jose Alvarez. The capacity met, so in that single family, the plus 120% AMI is based on the capacity in the vacant buildable lands model for those sort of single family R1 zones. And we have enough capacity to meet the need of the 10,000 homes. What we're lacking is at the lower end of the spectrum, and that's why the focus has been to try to expand capacity for multifamily and apartments.
Okay, thanks. And then under multiplex where it says capacity created through middle housing code updates, does that mean we've achieved that, or we're close to it, or what?
Right. So with the code updates, we're able to
meet that.
we're able to meet that. I think yes.
Meet that in the next 20 years, or?
Yes.
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 Okay.
All of these are over the next 20 years.
Okay, and then so my main question is about the apartments. where we need the 26,529 homes, it says the existing capacity only meets 1/3 of the need. And then what we discussed today, if implemented, how much of the remainder would be achieved by that, or would we still fall short?
The proposed changes with the code and then also the upzoning of certain areas that are part of um, the alternatives that are being studied in the DEIS. So those in combination would get us to achieving that capacity.
Okay, great. So if we take the recommended actions, we should be able to achieve all three of these areas in the next 20 years. Okay.
Correct.
That's correct. Over the
Okay.
planning horizon, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I guess that leaves it up to me then to wrap things up. I would just concur about the landscaping and recreational areas. And if there is some creative way that we could look to nearby parks, I think in some areas where there's multifamily and the requirement for some recreational area, that it's can be an afterthought and not too much there. And I would think maybe a fee in lieu of could be a strategy, because I know our Parks Department could use the funds to develop some more neighborhood pocket parks, things like that. So I think there could be some creative solutions that get us more toward what we're trying to achieve in terms of parks. And then it could also serve to address some of the climate change needs in those heat pockets that we've already been seeing. So I think that could be a good area to explore a little bit more. And the parking, I can understand the parking. One thing I would just note, just seeing what's being developed right now, the driveways are too short. It takes, or the cars are too big, one or the other, but they're halfway into the sidewalk, and so it's really undermines the functionality of the sidewalk. So if you could go back and take a look at that as well, or if in looking at all of the parking strategies, other things could be created that enable there to be a driveway and a sidewalk. That would be great. Oh, the multifamily apartment complex. You know, the context I put this in is really the whole spectrum of housing, and Clark County being the highest eviction rate in the state. That really underscores the need to have affordable housing, and that eviction rate absolutely fuels the along with other factors, but it is a factor related to the homeless population. So this is a critical need. And I wonder, you know, not just for density purposes, but for accessibility, having some what you call low rise, an additional floor or two, and maybe going beyond that 50 foot that we're trying to stay under for people who have mobility issues. If they're, and I know that you don't need to have an elevator if it's just 3 stories, and so I think there's no elevators in a 3-story apartment complex. So that really restricts anyone with mobility, or if you have young children, you can't schlep a couple of kids, your grocery, this and a stroller up a couple of floors. You're restricted to the first level. So it really eliminates a lot of housing for those populations. So I think the senior housing, young families, please consider that. And I think it would be worth having another floor to make it all more accessible. Or if it's 3 stories, I don't know, people aren't going to be happy about putting an elevator in a 3-story, but if it's a 4-story, maybe it pencils out a little bit better. Oh, and I would like to see at some point, I'm sure we'll see where these areas will be. And you mentioned 179th, and I know there are a number of people around 179th who have a few acres. They still see themselves in a rural area, even though the underlying zoning has changed. There will be significant, well, there's conflicts now, but there will be significant conflicts in those areas where you have, and maybe in other areas as well. But we just have to keep our eyes open and if there are ways to ameliorate that, we can try and do that. And then about affordability, I think we can set the table, we can have the zoning. I don't know that we can guarantee that it's going to be affordable. So I think monitoring what we've done so far and how that may be making things more affordable, but to really keep that in mind as we go forward, that the strategies we put in place are achieving the affordability goal will be real important as well. Okay. Just looking at my notes here. I think that's about it from me. Thanks very much. This is really important work. Maybe we can get another award down the road a little ways. That would be great. So
Yeah,
good work.
yeah. Thank you, councillors. My comment is that these are good questions and observations. We've been working with our consultant and the community to look at some of these issues. Some of it will, over time, be something that we will be monitoring. We don't have the data on some of the questions that you asked, Councillor Young. The Highway 99 area will be taking another hard look at. It may be a separate project that we may embark on, but there will be some changes within the Highway 99 corridor as we are looking to this work. The mapping that you asked of, yes, I've done perhaps in alternative 2 and 3, we did map out what is proposed, comparing that to the current zoning. So we might be able to, and Jose, correct me if I'm wrong, we might be able to provide a map that shows current zoning and what is proposed in certain areas, particularly where we have major arterials, whether it's 117, 179 and other areas, and as well as Highway 99. On ADU, it is something that we are going to be monitoring through ComDev to see what is actually coming in and what we are seeing. As you know, the legislature allowed or provide the provision for 2 ADUs. So we're going to be monitoring what is coming in, who is building that, and so forth. So we don't have the data on that, but as staff have looked into, based on the phase 1, what projects are coming in, there is significant interest, and we will be monitoring what those that are coming in are raising as concerns. So we plug in those that we will continue to make changes to what was already adopted. So thank you for this opportunity. We'll continue the work.
Great. Thank you.